we all know that Jesus was a sacrifice, but what does that mean? What kind of sacrifice was Jesus? There are 5 major types of sacrifices delineated in Leviticus 1 through 5, raising the question, what kind of sacrifice was Jesus? Let's start by just going through Leviticus 1 through 5 and the various sacrifices. The first clue lies in the fact that sin is not mentioned in Leviticus 1 to 3. The first 3 chapters then deal with sacrifices without addressing sin, implying that these sacrifices are not given for that purpose. The Hebrew terms used for these 3 sacrifices are olah, that's in Leviticus 1, it's usually translated burnt offering or whole offering, mincha, Leviticus 2, usually translated grain offering or cereal offering, and shlamim, usually translated peace offering or fellowship offering, and that's Leviticus 3. Now, these are 3 significant sacrifices, but their lack of explicit connection with sin suggests they are not offered for that purpose. It is not until Leviticus 4 that we encounter an offering made for sin. It is called the chatat in Hebrew, often translated as sin offering or purification offering. Now, this word also happens to be the word for sin itself. This is clear in Leviticus 4:3, where both the word sin and sin offering are translated from the same Hebrew word, chatat. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, the same Greek word, hamartia, is also used to translate chatat in both cases. This will be important for us when we examine the New Testament because it was written in Greek. So is Jesus a hamartia, a sin offering, or purification offering? He certainly could be. But let's first look at Leviticus 5:14 to 6:7, at least in English numbering system, to see the other offering given for sin. The offering described in Leviticus 5:14, 6 through 7 is also given because of sin and is called asham, usually translated guilt offering. This offering is not only about offering something to God, but also about making restitution to one's fellow Israelite who has been wronged. We see this in Leviticus 6:5, where the Israelites are required to add a fifth to whatever they wrongly took from someone else. Since Jesus' sacrifice is not about restitution in this way, it is unlikely, in my opinion, that his sacrifice would have been considered an asham or guilt offering. This leaves us with the 4th offering, which is the sin offering or purification offering. Why the 2 quite different translations? The chatat sacrifice was indeed given after a sin was committed, connecting it to sin itself. However, it was also given at other times when no sin was committed. For example, the same sacrifice is given in Leviticus 8 through 9 to ordain the priests. In this ceremony, the chatat sacrifice has its normal function. Blood is used to purify the sanctuary before the priests can enter it. This is why it has been called a purification offering. And indeed, I think this is probably the best understanding of the term. However, its connection to sin cannot be forgotten. The very same word used for sin is also used for the offering itself. As we said earlier, sin pollutes and requires purification. Other things may also require purification. Even childbirth requires a chatat sacrifice, but there would be no need at all for purification if there was no sin at all. Thus, a purification offering does purify, but it specifically purifies from sin or its consequences. Now, we know that Jesus was offered as a sacrifice for sin. So that suggests that Jesus is a purification offering. What evidence do we have that Jesus is a purification offering from the New Testament, though? Is he ever actually called that? Yep. Hebrews 9:12. Hebrews 9:12 states that Jesus brings his own blood into the Holy of Holies to purify it, meaning the Holy of Holies. This parallels the ritual Day of Atonement in Leviticus 16. What sacrifice is brought into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement? The purification offering, the chatat, or the hamartia in Greek. The fact that Hebrews describes Jesus' blood as the blood brought into the Holy of Holies leads us to conclude that the author of Hebrews must have thought of Jesus as a purification offering. That is the kind of sacrifice that Jesus was. Now, Are there other texts that support Jesus as a purification offering? Because, Hebrews can be a little bit odd and hard to understand at times. Two other texts, I would argue, do seem to call Jesus a hamartia. One is 2 Corinthians 5:21, which states that God made him who knew no sin, hamartia, to become a sin offering, hamartia, for us. Most translations say that Jesus became sin for us, not a sin offering. But remember that the two Greek words are identical. In the context of Jesus being offered up as a sacrifice, it makes far more sense to interpret this verse as saying that Jesus became a sin offering. It also clearly alludes, in my opinion, to Leviticus 4:3, whereas others commit a hamartia, sin, and then offer a hamartia, purification offering for sin, Jesus never committed a hamartia, sin, but offers himself as a hamartia, purification offering for sin. The final text is Romans 8:3, where we read that God gave up his own son in the likeness of the flesh of a hamartia, for sin, hamartia. Again, many Bible translations render hamartia in this passage as a description of the flesh, as in the likeness of sinful flesh. However, the word hamartia is not an adjective meaning sinful here. And in the context of Jesus being a sacrifice and cleansing his people of sin, it is best understood as a purification offering. So Jesus is here called a hamartia, and it's given for the sake of sin, hamartia. So what kind of sacrifice was Jesus? He was a purification offering given for sin. And we see this in the New Testament itself. In Leviticus, this sacrifice was made for the purification of the tabernacle from the sins of the people. How does this translate to the function of Jesus' sacrifice in the New Testament? In each of the passages cited, the blood of Jesus cleanses believers from their sinfulness, making them more righteous. This is not necessarily the only function of Jesus' sacrifice, but it is the one highlighted in Romans 8:1-4, 2 Corinthians 5:17-21, and Hebrews 9:10-13. To riff off of Paul's statement in Romans, Jesus as purification offering gives believers the power to obey the righteous requirements of the law as they walk by the Spirit.